She said it like it was a diagnosis. You are too emotional, Nathan. You feel everything too much. You make everything bigger than it needs to be. She said it calmly, cleanly, the way you say something you have been thinking for a long time and have finally decided to stop keeping to yourself. And something in me, something that had been loud and hurting and reaching for her for months, went completely quiet. Not because she had convinced me, because she had finally shown me something I had been too emotional to see clearly before. She did not want a husband who felt things. She wanted a husband who was easy. So I decided to be easy. I became the calmest person she had ever seen, and it terrified her, because she understood, too late, that my emotions had never been the problem. They had been the only thing holding us together. The man I had always been. My name is Nathan. I am 35 years old, and I have been emotional my entire life. Not in the unstable way, not in the way that makes people uncomfortable or unpredictable, but in the way that means I feel things fully. Joy, disappointment, connection, loss, without the buffer that some people seem to have between experience and feeling. I cry at films. I remember anniversaries without being reminded. I notice when someone I love is quieter than usual, and I ask about it. I write things down when words feel important. I apologize when I am wrong, and I mean it every time. For most of my life I had been told, by people who loved me, that these things were strengths, that the world needed more people who felt things rather than fewer. My wife, her name was Alicia, had told me on our second date that my emotional openness was one of the things that had made her fall for me. That she had dated men who were closed off and unreachable, and that being with someone who actually showed up emotionally was something she had not known she needed until she experienced it. I had believed her. For 4 years of marriage, I had believed her completely. When the story changed. Somewhere in year 3, the thing she had called a strength became something she called a problem. It did not happen all at once. It happened in the way most important shifts happen in long relationships, gradually, in small moments, each one individually dismissible and collectively devastating. The first time she used the word overreacting. We had been discussing something that genuinely hurt me, a plan she had canceled last minute for the 3rd time in a month. I had expressed how I felt about it, calmly, I thought, but honestly. She had sighed and said I was overreacting. I had let it go. The second time, I had told her I felt disconnected from her, that I missed the closeness we used to have, that I wanted us to prioritize each other more intentionally. She had told me I was being too intense. The third time, I had cried during a difficult conversation about something that mattered to me deeply. A real thing, a legitimate grief I had been carrying. She had looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not empathy, not concern, something closer to impatience. And she had said, "Nathan, you are too much sometimes. Not everything requires this level of feeling." I had apologized. I had actually apologized for having feelings. And that apology, looking back, was the beginning of the end. The night she said it plainly. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in November. We had been having a conversation, one of many we had been having in circles for months, about the state of our marriage, about the distance, about the fact that something between us had shifted and neither of us seemed to know how to shift it back. I had been trying, genuinely. I had been expressing myself, carefully, honestly, with every tool I had, trying to close the gap between us through words and presence and vulnerability. And she had listened, for a while. And then she put her hand up, and she said, "Nathan, I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without reacting." I told her I was listening. She said, "You are too emotional. You have always been too emotional. Everything becomes a conversation. Everything becomes a feeling that needs to be processed and discussed and resolved. I am exhausted by it. I feel like I cannot have a single bad day without it becoming a 2-hour discussion about the state of our relationship. I need you to just be calmer, be easier. Stop making everything so heavy." She said it without cruelty. That was almost the hardest part. She said it like she was being helpful, like she was finally giving me information I needed. I sat with those words for a long moment, and then something very quiet happened inside me. Something that had been loud and hurting and reaching simply stopped. Not dramatically, not with anger. It just stopped. And I said, "Okay." One word, and I meant it completely. What okay actually meant. She thought okay meant I had heard her and would adjust, that I would sand down the parts of myself she found difficult, that I would become the easier, calmer, less feeling version of her husband that she had described wanting. That is not what okay meant. Okay meant, I finally understand. It meant, I see now what this is. It meant, I have been trying to reach someone who does not want to be reached, and I am going to stop trying. Not as a strategy, not to make a point, but because continuing to try to connect with someone who finds your emotional honesty exhausting is not love. It is self-destruction dressed up as devotion. So I stopped. I became, genuinely, completely, calm. The calm that changed everything. The change was not dramatic. That is important to understand. I did not go cold. I did not become cruel. I did not withdraw in a way that was designed to punish her. I simply stopped performing emotions I was no longer willing to perform for someone who did not want them. I answered questions directly. I was pleasant at dinner. I handled my responsibilities without complaint. I was present in the physical space of our marriage while becoming genuinely, quietly, absent from everything beneath the surface. It took her 4 days to notice. On the 5th day, she asked me if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She looked at me for a moment and said, "You seem different." I told her I was trying to be calmer, the way she had asked. She nodded slowly and said nothing else, but something had shifted in her face, something that looked, and I want to be precise about this, like the very earliest edge of fear. 2 weeks of quiet. Over the following 2 weeks, something fascinating happened. The dynamic between us reversed completely. Where I had previously been the one reaching, asking questions, initiating conversations, trying to close the gap, she began doing all of those things. She started asking about my day with a specificity she had not shown in months. She initiated conversations at dinner. She reached for my hand while we were watching television, something she had not done in a long time. And each time, I responded warmly, pleasantly, without depth. Because depth requires trust, and trust requires someone who does not find your emotional honesty exhausting. On the 12th day, she sat across from me at breakfast and said, "Talk to me. Please. Say something real." I looked at her and said, "I am. I am being exactly what you asked me to be." She stared at me, and her eyes filled, and I understood, watching that happen, that she had not known what she was asking for when she asked me to be calmer. She had not understood that my emotions were not a flaw in our connection. They were the connection, and she had asked me to turn them off. So I had. And now she was sitting across from the version of me she had said she wanted, and it was the loneliest she had ever felt in our marriage. What came out? 3 weeks after the Tuesday in November, Alicia told me the truth. Not all at once, but in the way truths come out when the pressure of carrying them becomes greater than the fear of releasing them. There was someone she had been talking to, a person from her past, an ex from before we met, who had re-entered her life through social media about 6 months ago. Someone she described as easy, uncomplicated. Someone who did not require the emotional labor she felt our marriage demanded. She said nothing physical had happened. She said she did not know what it was. She said she had been using the comparison, consciously or not, to build a case in her own mind for why our marriage was the problem, rather than examining what she had been doing. She told me this quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the floor. When she finished, I sat with it for a long moment. And then I told her something I had been understanding slowly over 3 weeks of silence. I told her that the version of me she had found exhausting, the emotional, present, feeling version, was not a version. It was me, the actual person she had married, and that I had spent weeks trying to become someone easier for her, and that in doing so, I had learned something essential. I could be easier, but I could not be different, and she deserved someone who loved the person she actually was, and I deserved the same. We went to counseling. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. We did not immediately end the marriage. We tried, genuinely tried, with a professional who helped us say things we had not known how to say to each other directly. What came out in those sessions was complicated and painful, and more layered than either of us had understood going in. Alicia had grown up in a household where emotional expression was associated with instability, where feelings were something you managed privately rather than shared openly. My emotional availability had attracted her precisely because it was everything she had not had, and then frightened her for exactly the same reason. She had not been trying to diminish me, she had been trying to protect herself from something she did not have the language for. Understanding that did not fix everything, but it changed the shape of the hurt. Where we are now. I am 35 years old, and I will not tell you how the story ended, because in some ways it has not ended yet. It is still being written, slowly, honestly, one difficult conversation at a time. What I will tell you is this. The 2 weeks of calm taught me something I could not have learned any other way. My emotions were never the problem. They were the thing that made me worth knowing. And any relationship, any person that asks you to be less of yourself in order to be more comfortable for them is asking you to disappear. Slowly, quietly. One apology for feeling at a time. Do not apologize for feeling. Feel everything. Feel it fully and honestly, and without shrinking it to fit someone else's comfort level. Because the right person, the person worth building a life with, will not find your depth exhausting. They will find it home. If this story reached somewhere real, if you have ever been told that the way you love is too much, drop a comment below. You are not too much. You are exactly enough for the right person. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being emotional is not a weakness. It is one of the last honest things left in a world that keeps asking us to feel less. Like and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and I promise you, it will stay with you long after it ends. See you there!